goodness, guess who decided to film with no headband? I'm so happy. I just did it. I just did it. No headband. So happy about it. So happy about that. I know it's kind of a weird way to start a video, but I just wanted to point that out. Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookish Rum, and I am back with another video. Today, as you can see from the title, we are here to do my final August wrap up. It's been a great reading month. I enjoyed a lot of stuff that I read. There was some stuff I didn't really like. I got back to reading my comics. I got back to reading some romance. So it was just overall a good month. So as always, we start with the stats. Everyone loves the stats. We actually are adding a couple of new stats this month because there were two other things that I wanted to start keeping track of. I think I'm gonna have to go back to January through July and pull the information that I need for those books as far as statistics are concerned. But for right now, I do have these kind of figured out for the month of August. So yes, and I want to be able to give you kind of an idea when I do my year-end statistics. So let's go ahead and jump in for everybody's favorite part. The one thing that I hate calculating every month, but I do it because it is fun to look at, and I know that everybody loves looking at the statistics. So for the month of August, I read a total of 23 books, and that is a total of 5,428 pages. In terms of genre, I read 3 nonfiction, 2 thrillers, 3 graphic novels, comics, or manga, 10 romance / contemporary, 1 realistic fiction, 1 horror, 1 paranormal, and 2 for science fiction fantasy. For age breakdown, I read no children's books and no middle grade books. I need to change that going into September. I read 6 YA books and 17 adult books. For format, I read 3 physical, 10 audiobooks, and 10 ebooks. For sources, 2 were owned, 9 were borrowed from the library, 4 were review copies, 5 were from Kindle Unlimited, 1 was from Marvel Unlimited, and 2 were from Libro FM. So I'm shocked I didn't listen to more from Libro FM in August. As you all know, there are some other stats that I look at, just looking at how I'm reading in terms of diversity. 2 had LGBTQIA+ representation. None were translated. 15 are considered own voices or diverse. 1 was over 500 pages. I did not reread anything this month, and 10 were written by Black authors. So the 2 other sections that I'm going to start keeping track of are going to include publication date as well as my ratings and my average ratings for the month. So we're going to start with the publication dates, and the graph that I'm going to be posting here is actually separated by decade and not necessarily by every year, because it was just easier to look at that statistically in terms of decade as opposed to breaking down every single year. It just the graph would have been out of control. So for publication, I read 18 from 2020, 2 from 2019, 1 from 2017, 1 from 2012, and 1 from 1963. As far as my star ratings are concerned, I read 1 1 star, 1 2 star, 1 2.5 star, 5 3 stars, 1 3.5 star, 9 4 stars, 2 that were 4.5 stars, and 3 that were 5 stars. And this gave me a monthly average of 3.65 stars, which when you think about it is actually pretty average. It's an average rating. 3.65 is pretty good for the month. So as you all know, I always do a mid-month wrap up because I have a tendency to read quite a bit during the month, and it would be an extremely long monthly wrap up if I didn't do it in 2 parts. So I'm not going to talk about the books that I read in the first half of the month, but I will list them, and I'll make sure that I link my mid-month wrap up in the card symbol above. So the first book that I read was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, When to Watch by Kate Stayman London, The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, Surrender White People by D.L. Hughley, Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko, and Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. So I ended up reading a little bit more in the second half, but the books were also shorter in the second half of August. So let's go ahead and jump in to the first book that I read in the later part of this month. So the first book that I ended up reading was A Marriage Game by Sarah Desai. I believe that's how you say her last name. And this is a contemporary romance book that I ended up listening to on audio. It focuses on two main characters by the name of Layla and Sam. And Layla was actually in New York working, and then some things went horribly wrong. She ends up leaving her job, or she gets fired, one of the two. And then she journeys back home to live with her parents, who run this Michelin star restaurant. And Layla's father has noticed that she doesn't have a good dating record. The guy that she was actually with ended up being caught in between a cheating scandal of some sorts. I won't go into specific details because I don't want to spoil it, but he felt really bad about the situation, so he signed her up for a dating website and began to take applications for individuals that he thought might be good husband material for Layla. So when Layla moves back home, she ends up getting this office area, and it's right above her parents' restaurant, and she wants to start her own business there and take clients to help them gain employment. And what they didn't realize is that her father gets into a situation, and then we found out that Sam actually is the one that was originally supposed to lease the building. So Layla and Sam meet, and then of course they are not really the best of friends when they first meet, but there's a lot of sexual tension and chemistry between the two of them that I really enjoy. So Layla and Sam end up playing this game where Sam is going to help Layla interview potential suitors for marriage, and if he helps her find a husband, then he gets to keep the office space that's above the restaurant. So what I loved about this book so much initially was that the chemistry and the attraction that was between Sam and Layla was actually so good. It was so strong. You can really feel that they had this attraction to one another that of course was going to play out in their favor in the end. But I'm always a big stickler for characters that have chemistry, especially when it's something like hate to love or friend to love, whatever the trope may be. I just like to see chemistry, and we're going to talk about a book that I read later on this month where the characters didn't have chemistry and it was a very awkward situation. So they had great chemistry, and I love the idea of Sam helping her interview these suitors, because we end up meeting some very interesting characters. There's one in particular who was a CIA agent that was so strange. He would not smile, he wouldn't laugh, but he knew things about Layla that there's no way that he could have known if he wasn't a CIA agent. But then Sam was like, he's a fraud, he's not real. And the way that the guy was talking, you would think like, oh, he's just a weirdo, like this is just a strange situation. But then he would say things and you'd be like, wait, how could he possibly know that if he actually was not a CIA agent? It was just funny. Like, a lot of the suitors were hilarious, and Layla ends up in these weird predicaments where these suitors have turned in their applications and their resumes for marriage, but they're not really looking for a wife in the way that Layla wants to be married to someone. So I just thought that aspect was so funny. It was so entertaining. This book does have some trigger warnings for domestic violence. I won't speak to how because it is part of the narrative of the book. So what ended up bothering me is that I really enjoyed this book, but there were two scenes that completely threw me off, and one characteristic about Sam that I really didn't like. So starting with Sam. Sam was a very headstrong character. He was very uptight. He was very about his business. He didn't like anybody to interfere with his work. He was very much so just straight line type of personality, A-type personality almost. And he always thought that he knew the best. He knew what everybody wanted. He knew what everybody felt. And throughout the book, you can see other characters tell Sam like, hey, just because you think you know what's best doesn't mean that you actually know what's best. And I thought that maybe over the course of the novel he would eventually learn, but literally up into the last like 5% of the book, the last scene in the book, he still didn't get the fact that it wasn't about him and what he wanted. And it really frustrated me because he's being told you need to shut up and listen, and he just never seemed to get it. And it was very aggravating to see a character attempt to develop but then kind of fall flat. And then there was this discussion around domestic violence where there were two scenes in which I felt like there was some issues with violence against another individual, and it wasn't really addressed. And I don't know if I read it wrong. There was one particular scene that Layla was in that was very, very awkward with someone that she was going to interview on her own, and something happened that threw me off, especially when the book had this discussion about domestic violence and abuse. And I don't know, it was just a strange situation. And then at the end of the book, it was very clunky. Like, something about that ending just wasn't right. And it was a situation that happened between Sam and his sister, and the way that it was written was very, very strange. But outside of those elements, I did like it. I think that the representation was really fun. There was a lot of cultural references, especially to like Bollywood films and stuff, that I really, really enjoy. I can't speak exactly to the Desi representation because I can't. So I don't know if it was an accurate portrayal. So if not, please let me know. But I did like that aspect of the book and learning so much about a different culture. And I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. The next book, of course, that I read was Twisted, The Tangled History of Black Hair Culture. And this is by Emma Dabiri. I am not going to talk about this one except for the fact to let you know that I do have a full review of this book, as well as some discussions about my own black hair experience. So this book is surrounding Emma's experience with her own hair, and how black hair culture is so important to the black community, and how our hair has been policed. We haven't been taught the history of our hair. We haven't really been taught the value of our hair, and it's such an interesting and complex and dynamic conversation. But I absolutely love this book. I think in my review I said I only gave it 4 stars, but actually in my written review I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. It was just a little bit of a technical issue with her trying to incorporate too much information at one time, but for the most part, not for the most part, for all of it, I absolutely love this book. So I'm going to make sure I link that review up in the card symbol above. Definitely check it out. I think that this book has a different name in the UK. So if it's by Emma Dabiri, it is the same exact book. I think people have been telling me it's Don't Touch My Hair is the original title, but when it was published here in the States, it got the title Twisted, Tangled History of Black Hair Culture. So yes. The next book that I read was Now That I Found You by Christina Forrest, and this is a YA contemporary book that was released in August of this year, and it is about our main character by the name of Evie, who is this big superstar on the rise in the film industry, and she is just signing to her first major movie deal. But then, of course, things go wrong. Her best friend does her completely dirty, and she ends up losing the role, and she goes to New York to find solace and get the assistance and help of her grandmother Gigi, who also is a movie star in her own right. She was very well known, I think maybe 20-30 years prior to the events that take place in this book. And Evie and Gigi have this really interesting and complex and dynamic relationship that I really, really love, between grandparent to grandchild. And then all of a sudden Gigi goes missing, and that's when Evie ends up meeting Milo, and Milo has to help Evie find Gigi for unspecified reasons that I won't go into because I don't want to spoil it. I did end up doing a full reading vlog of this and 15 thoughts while reading. So if you want to know more about this and hear like a more detailed review of this book, I definitely will link that one in the card symbol for you all to check out. And I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. So then I got on my comic book kick, which I was so excited about, and I'm definitely reading more comics in September, but I decided to get a head start on that in August of this year. And the first one that I read was Champions Volume 1, and this was written by Mark Wade. And Champions takes place, I think, during the events or after the events of Civil War II, and it starts off with Miss Marvel leaving the Avengers because the Avengers are causing all this destruction and chaos for civilians, and then they don't want to do the dirty work to rebuild these cities. So Miss Marvel ends up getting pissed, and this is Kamala Khan. She gets very pissed off at the Avengers and she ends up leaving. So she ends up teaming up with some other superheroes that include Nova, Miles Morales as Spider-Man. There is, I think her name is Viv, and she's the daughter of the Vision. There's Cho, who is this new Hulk, and then we also end up getting some perspective from Cyclops, who I believe is a younger version of Cyclops from X-Men. So I haven't read a lot of the comics surrounding Civil War II, but I had a general understanding going into this, so it wasn't really confusing. So these 5 really end up focusing on some things, or 6. So these 6 end up focusing on some real world issues, namely trafficking, and trying to figure out how they can better help social injustices that are happening around the world. I really like the artwork and the storyline of this, and I like that they were teaming up as a group and we were getting some younger versions of some superheroes that have already been a part of Marvel for decades. So what ends up being a problem for me with this one is that I think that it tried a little too hard to point out social injustices that were happening in the world at the time of writing this comic. It just didn't feel organic. It didn't feel naturally. It felt like performative in some aspects. I'm sure that wasn't Mark Waid's intentions, but it does come off that little way because it just tried too hard. So it became one of those things where it was like, okay, so are we doing this and a means of raising awareness, or do we feel compelled that we have to include this? And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be included in comics, because it shouldn't. It should definitely be included in comics, but it's one of those situations where it's like things should happen organically and things should be well thought out before placing them in comics. I don't know. It just came off a little weird to me, a little forced. That's the word I was looking for. It felt forced instead of a natural occurrence. And I think it's important that Kamala Khan was included in this, because a lot of what G. Willow Wilson did with Kamala Khan and Miss Marvel did circle around activism and looking at social justice issues, but that was coming from G. Willow Wilson. And I am a huge sucker for G. Willow Wilson, and it felt true and organic to Kamala Khan. I don't know how true and organic it felt to these other superheroes, so that's why it came off a little forced in some aspects. But I did think it was okay. I gave it 3.5 stars. I will be picking up volume 2, and I'm just so happy to be getting more of Kamala Khan, especially just, I don't know, I just love her. I love the G. Willow Wilson run of Kamala Khan. I think she's been picked up by someone else, but no one's ever going to be able to touch the G. Willow Wilson run, and that's just my personal opinion. The next one that I ended up reading was Justice League Volume 1, which is part of DC's New 52 by Geoff Johns. And I think that I actually read this one too early, so I don't want to talk about this too much because it's going to spoil a little bit of my mid-month wrap-up for September, but I think I need to include a little bit of it in order to explain it. So I was supposed to read another comic before this one, which was Batman Superman Volume 1, The Crossworlds, or Crossworlds, not The Crossworlds. I think it's just called Crossworlds. And this kind of is a jumping point for understanding how New 52 comes about, because I don't know how many people know, like, DC used to run on what was called like the multiverse, where you had these different versions of Earth and these superheroes and parallel universes, and then eventually it kind of got out of control, and then they condensed it down to one world, and then all of a sudden they went back to the multiverse type of situation. And this is kind of streamlining everything back, I think, into one, if that's my understanding. It's kind of confusing. So what we see here is a junction of our regular Earth of DC and then Earth 2. And this is the comic that I just actually finished last night. And Earth 2 has an older version of Batman and Superman. And the one that we're reading for New 52 has a younger version of Batman and Superman. So in the one that I read last night, Batman and Superman actually are really, really good friends. They get along very, very well. But this Batman and Superman in New 52 don't get along as well. They're younger. They have a little bit more of like a tension going on between them. They're not really that close. It's just, they're very interesting. And this all ties into Darkseid and some other stuff. And the reason why that was, I think, important for me to read before reading Justice League is because Justice League is where we see everybody team up, and we don't necessarily get origin stories of everyone, but we get this insight to how they become a team. And I think that by reading that first one, I got a little bit more understanding of Batman and Superman in the Earth that is New 52 of DC. So I enjoyed it, don't get me wrong. I really enjoyed it. I actually ended up giving 4 stars. But now that makes more sense now that I have read this previous one, which looks at Batman and Superman in 2 different versions from 2 different parts of the multiverse of DC. It's such a complex system, and I hate talking about it because I always feel like I'm gonna get stuff wrong or I'm not gonna explain it well, but that just explains how this new Justice League kind of came about and how these versions of these superheroes exist. And I think I loved just the whole dynamic of everybody. Of course, you know, there's like Wonder Woman, Flash, there is Green Lantern, Superman, Batman, Aquaman, and Cyborg. I hope I'm not missing anybody. But what was so fascinating about this is that I did not realize that Green Lantern was such an ass. Like, he's an asshole to the point that it's very comical. Like, he's trying super hard to be this cool guy, and he's trying super hard to impress all these people, and you see that happening in real time, and it's really, really interesting. But I did like the dynamic, the group dynamic, and I like finding out about Cyborg's origin story. So in this comic, we don't really know much about everybody's origin stories except Cyborg in relationship to the Justice League. Everybody else in the New 52 line has their own origin story in their separate comic for the Justice League. I can't speak to too much outside of the Justice League, but I'm gonna start reading those origin stories soon, so you'll be seeing those reviews come soon. And if I end up reading too much of New 52 in the month of September, I may end up doing even a separate wrap up for that, because as you can see, I can talk on and on and on and on and on about these comics and the world, and because DC's multiverse is such a complex thing that it's super hard to explain, and DC has some of the worst continuity issues. I thought Marvel did, but it's actually DC has horrible continuity issues. So because their continuity issues are so big, things get super confusing with trying to keep track of what version of what characters we're sticking with. Like, even with the comic that I read yesterday, I had such a hard time keeping up with what Superman was from the, you know, the regular Earth, like New 52 possibility Earth, and then what character, like what Superman I was dealing with from Earth 2. And then I started reading another one out of order, and I stopped reading it to get myself back on track, and there was a Superman that I met from Earth 3 that was black. So we may do a separate wrap up for this stuff because it's just so much. But yeah, like I said, I did end up giving that one 4 stars, and I really, really did enjoy it. The next one that I ended up reading was Real Men Knit by Kwana Jackson. Did not like this one. I can tell you off the bat, I gave this one 2 stars. I was expecting so much more, and I think I talked about this a little bit in the video that went up on Wednesday about how I thought this was going to be a good black romance between 2 interesting characters set on the backdrop of a knitting shop, which was something that was not done, or something that I have personally not seen before, and we really just didn't get that. It was not what we thought it was going to be. It ended up being this really, really dry romance between 2 main characters named Jesse and Carrie, and it's set on the backdrop of Jesse's mother, his adoptive mother, passing away, and him possibly having to take over the shop, and Carrie having been a part of this circle of these 4 guys who were adopted by Mama Joy, and just being friends with them, and always having to deal with these speculations of her possibly having dated one, and her wanting to keep the shop open and working with Jesse to keep the shop open. But see, the thing about it is that I didn't like Jesse as a character either, because he was, like I said, an A1 player. He was very about himself, and then when the tables got turned and Carrie didn't want to trust him. It was one of those, woe is me, I feel so bad, I did so wrong. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, because that's just the lifestyle that you led. Like, you weren't about commitment, so she's not going to trust you with commitment. And then even then, like, there was no chemistry between the two characters. There was nothing there. So literally when they have sex for the first time, I was cringing because it was like watching two best friends who were better off like with a friendship, almost to the point of siblings, have sex. And it was just awkward. It was super awkward, and I was like, I just don't like it. And then nothing happened. The plot was super dry, to the point where I was at 30% and I was like, I really need to DNF this book. But as I've always said, I have issued DNFing books, and this one was no different. Literally went through 60% of the book with nothing happening. The same routines. Jesse fending off and sleeping with these women that were going to do nothing but attempt to use him. Carrie trying to figure out how she was going to help run the shop, coming to open up the shop, and then watching women go in and out the shop who have been sleeping with Jesse. Like, that literally was the same repetitive routine that happened for the first 60% of the book, and it was just not good. And then I think that it would have been nicer had we gotten more fleshed out characteristics of Jesse's brothers, but because they became background to Jesse's foreground and they were not super developed, we learned tidbits of information about them, but just not enough to my liking. Because of that situation, we ended up with one-dimensional, bland brothers who could have been more vital to the story itself. But I didn't enjoy it. I know a lot of people didn't like it. I think a lot of people were really, really excited to read it. I was one of those individuals as well, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. So like I said, I ended up giving it 2 stars. The next one that I have is We Are Not From Here by Jenny Torres Sanchez. And okay, so Wednesday I put up my video of my favorites of 2020 so far and the worst books of 2020 so far. And I don't know how I didn't put this one on the list, because it definitely deserves to be on the list. And I'm trying to keep it together, because this was kind of one of those same situations as Anger is a Gift, where it emotionally broke me, and I'm still trying to process a lot of this book, because I was aware, but I think that sometimes we get blinded by activism for our own racial groups that sometimes we can't see past that. And I was aware of some things that were being talked about in this book, but the reality of it really hit me in the stomach, especially when you think about the fact that there are kids who are literally going through this every single day. And it made me really check myself, because I know that my child never will have to go through this. So going back to actually what the book is about, it is about 3 teenagers, Pulga, Chico, and Pequeña, and they live in Guatemala, and they have a whole bunch of things going on, rough things. This book has trigger warnings for graphic pregnancy, teen pregnancy, murder, gang violence, death of a parent, dismemberment. I can't even remember the full list, but definitely check out my review, because I have the full list of trigger warnings for this. And there's so much going on that there's a point where Pulga is pretty much like, we have to leave, we need to leave, we can't stay here. And this book is told from alternating perspectives of Pequeña and Pulga makes a decision for them to leave. And they opt to leave to make this journey from Guatemala all the way to United States through Mexico. And Jenny Torres Sanchez basically highlights everything that could possibly go wrong on this trip through their travels. They end up having to take this train because it's the fastest way to go from Guatemala to the United States. This train called the Beast, and people ride on this train, on the top of this train. They run and try to catch this train, and people die doing this. Whether they fall off, whether they die of dehydration, whether they get run over by the train, whether there's dismemberment that occurs because of the train. It was just really, really hard to see 3 teenagers make this journey and not know whether they were going to actually end up making it to the United States or not. I got so heartbroken when I realized that they would rather have died making this journey, trying to make this journey, because they just couldn't go back home. They couldn't do it. There's no way that they could have gone back to the place that they were living because it was just too dangerous. And these are kids who left and they didn't tell their parents. And I could only imagine as a mom, if my daughter had to leave and I had no idea what happened to her. And you just pray that they make it from point A to point B and they go through it. There is so many things that go wrong in this book. Everything seems to go wrong in this book, and it is not a book of happy endings either. It's not a book that's going to make you feel good or have redeeming aspects to make you happy. It's not about that. It's about painting this picture of reality of what these kids go through every single day. I mean, everything from the violence that a lot of them are facing in their home countries to the dangerous things that happen on this journey, whether it's lack of food, dehydration, the possibility of rape and sexual assault, people killing each other for supplies, not having anywhere to stop, you know, not knowing if someone was going to find you from your home city or country and come take you back, to getting to the border and being kept in cages. And I am so ashamed sometimes of the things that my country does to people who are seeking asylum. And I think what Jenny Torres Sanchez did in this book is that she makes you realize it's so easy to judge people. So we have this narrative in this country, which I'm sure people are aware of based on what the president says here about things in relation to immigrants and people who are seeking asylum, and labeling them and not really knowing what struggles they've come from, not knowing why they're leaving. Why would anybody just pick up and leave everything? You have to really think about that. Why would you leave everything behind? Everything you know, all of your items, family. You pick up and you leave with only the clothes on your back and and probably a book bag, if that, and you leave. Why would someone do that? Because they want to bring trouble to your country. It just, and to treat kids like this, kids who are willing to die to make it to a better place because their country is not safe for them to be there. And it just really made me upset to see that these things do happen on our borders all the time, every day, every minute, every second, every hour of every day. And I think that this is a lesser known book in this community, but my God, y'all, if you haven't heard of it, pick it up. But pick it up with caution, in the sense of prepare your mind and your heart for the reality of this situation. Prepare your mind and heart to be broken, in the sense that there's no reason for people to say I didn't know anymore. There's no reason for that. So I ended up reading this article. I can't remember who it was by, but I'll make sure I link it in the description box, about the train, the Beast, and how people travel on this train to make the journey quicker and what happens as a result. I wasn't really aware of that prior to reading this book, so definitely check that out. If you can't tell, I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars. The next one that I ended up reading was My Fake Rick by Eva Lee, and I needed something a little light after finishing We Are Not From Here. That was a difficult read. So I picked up My Fake Rick, which is technically my first historical romance, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it. It is about these 2 characters that are essentially scientists, and what's so interesting about this is that Eva Lee has said that these books are based on some of her favorite 80s movies, and that the first time that we meet these 5 men at this boarding school is reminiscent of The Breakfast Club. And then this book's particular, I believe, from the way that I read it, is Can't Buy Me Love, the 80s movie, where you have, you know, this kid that wants to be popular and cool, so he pays his girl to actually, you know, make him cool and make him fit in. And if you haven't seen Can't Buy Me Love, if you've seen the movie Love Don't Cost a Thing with Nick Cannon and Christina Milian, it's that movie, which is actually based off of Can't Buy Me Love, which is what this book is based off of. And that's my interpretation. That's the vibes that I got from it. So like I said, this focuses on 2 characters, Grace and Seb, and they're both scientists. And she actually is a wallflower. She's looking to get married. So what she decides to do is that she is going to enlist the assistance of a man to make another man jealous in order to convince the said jealous man to date her, and she ends up partnering with Sebastian. They make this deal. I think he's going on a voyage that she wants to be a part of. They make this deal, and when they make this deal, she says that she'll make him into a rake, and then he'll help her make this guy jealous, and they have this whole deal going on. But of course, that never ends up happening, y'all. You know, when stuff like this happens, eventually you get to know each other, you end up falling in love type of situation, and that's what it was. And I think that I have some misconceptions going into historical romance. I think that a lot of people think that there's no smut in historical romance, which I think it's not true. Clearly from this, I was like, there might be some like fade to black scenes, some, tame little, I don't know how to describe it, just some tame scenes in terms of smut and sex scenes. And I was so wrong. It was so cute because Sebastian was just like this cute, awkward, nerdy type of guy, and then all of a sudden there were some things that came out of his mouth in some scenes where I was like, whoa, all right, Sebastian. Oof. And I love that Eva Lee focus, of course, of making this as forward thinking as possible in terms of not adhering to the standards of the time period in which this book was written. The characters are very forward. There's a little discussion about colonialism, and there's big discussion about gender role expectations and sexuality and women being confident in their sexuality. There's a point at which Grace basically says that she is comfortable in her sexuality in terms of actually pleasuring herself, and people were surprised at that. But I like that that was a conversation that was had, because that is still a difficult conversation in the 21st century, which is so crazy that it is a difficult conversation. But it is a difficult conversation, and things that people actually tell women that they shouldn't be doing. But I like that she did throw that in there, and that Grace was unapologetic about that. A couple of things that I didn't enjoy about this book included the fact that I think that it was a little too long. There were some parts that dragged, and I think that there were intentional miscommunication, things that happened that didn't feel so natural, that made the book longer than maybe what it should have been. So I found myself getting a little bored in some sections. And then there was this minor conflict that was slightly brought up in relation to Seb's father, and I feel like I would have enjoyed it had he been brought on page and that conflict would have been talked about a little bit more. It kind of just fizzled out towards the end of the book, so I found that very interesting. I did end up giving this, like I said, 4 stars. I really did like it, and I just got the second book on audio, so I'll be listening to that in the month of September. The next thing that I read was Blood is Another Word for Hunger by River Solomon. This is a short novella that Rivers published through Tor.com, and it is about a young slave girl by the name of Sully who ends up killing the slave owners that run the plantation, the entire family. She kills them all, and this ends up causing a rift between our world and the supernatural world, and she ends up meeting some people who have passed on but come back through her actions. I don't want to spoil it because it is short. It's only 26 pages. I think I enjoyed that paranormal element of it, and I think that I like some of the discussions that River Solomon was attempting to have in this book, but my issue is that it transpired from this mystical paranormal element to more so about reconstructing and rebuilding, and that's where it lost me a little bit. But I did like that it had a conversation about the effect of trauma and how it's long lasting, and how when we try to get rid of the people who necessarily have inflicted some form of trauma on us, that doesn't always get rid of the problem, because the trauma is long lasting and has that long lasting effect. So I think Sully was in the same position where she wanted to kill this entire family because they had inflicted so much trauma on her and made her into this bitter human, and she thought by killing them she would get some resolution, some absolution from her pain. But that's not the case. She literally ends up in the same predicament of not necessarily feeling good about herself because the psychological effects of that long-lasting trauma and abuse still left their mark on her. And I wonder sometimes too if that is River Solomon discussion of the long effect of psychological abuse and mental abuse that is left on Black people from the time of slavery. But it was such a dramatic switch for me, and it happened so abruptly that I ended up not enjoying it, of course, as much as I enjoyed The Deep, but it was still pretty decent. But I ended up giving it 3 stars. It definitely has trigger warnings for gore, death, suicidal ideation, and suicide, and there is some LGBTQIA plus rep in this between our character and another character, and that's all I'm gonna say. Because I was in the mood, I ended up finishing the Luminous Cruise Chronicles, which is a series that I've been reading since about May, that was written by a group of Black indie romance authors, just as a way to kind of take our minds off of what was happening with COVID. And they all take place on the same cruise ship, and each book is written by a different author. And I decided to finish out the series because I had read the first 3, and I was like, you know what, it's about time that I finish the series. And they're really short novellas. I think the longest ones are probably 40-50 pages, and they go as short as 20 pages. So I went ahead and finished those, and I'm not going to talk much about these because they're so short, but I will kind of give some brief thoughts on each one, and I'm pulling them up because I can't remember the titles off the top of my head. So the first one that I read was Love on Cruise Control, which is book number 4 in the series, and this was written by TK. This one focuses on a character by the name of Malaysia, and she's on this cruise to get away from social media. I think she was a model, or still is a model at the time of this book, and of course she meets somebody on the cruise ship. I only gave this one 3 stars because it didn't have an epilogue, which I really wanted. I think a lot of them had epilogues at that time, and also I didn't feel the chemistry between the characters. The sex scenes were really good, but they still were a little on the awkward side. And then our male lead was just, he used the word ma too much. He's from New York, and I know that's a thing with New York guys, but it just was excessively used. So I didn't enjoy this one. I don't know if this is going to be my least favorite of the series, but it definitely was not my favorite. After that, I read book number 5, which is Love Unexpected, and this one was written by Turtleberry, and I gave this one 4 stars, and I thought it was really good because this is where we actually got to see a little diversity in the series, where this was a female-female romance, and it was between Penny and Jay, and Penny had never had any experience as being with another woman before, but she is instantaneously attracted to Jay, and it wasn't fetishized in any way. Like, she genuinely was attracted. She wanted a relationship with Jay, and I love that they had this friendship that developed before they got intimate, and Jay was very patient with Penny and really wanted Penny to be comfortable, and I just appreciated that, and they just worked very well together. And like I said, I gave this one 4 stars because I thought it was just absolutely adorable. The next one in the series is Love's False Start, and this is book number 6 by Diana W, and this is about a woman by the name of Aspen who comes on the ship with no expectations. She doesn't have these thoughts of possibly wanting to be with anyone, and then her ex, well, not necessarily her ex, but it was this guy that she had been interested in seeing for the first time in person because they had been talking online. They were doing online dating, and they were supposed to meet in person, and then he ghosted her, but then she sees him on the ship, and then it ensues from there. And I thought it was really cute because they went pretty fast because this one was 20 pages, but I love that the author created this background chemistry, so when they instantaneously had chemistry on page, it made sense. It didn't feel rushed. It didn't feel like it was instant love, because we knew that they already had a history and that they already were attracted to each other, and they had been talking and wanting to date each other for several months prior to the contents of this book. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really cute. They had some really fun moments together on the ship, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Book number 7 was Love Lessons, and this one was written by Honesty Price, and this actually focused on a person on the ship. Well, she didn't necessarily work on this cruise ship, but she works in the cruise industry, and she was just looking for a no strings attached type of situation where she could just have fun, and she ended up meeting this football player by the name of Wesley, and Wesley's arrogant. Like, Wesley's an ass, but they end up getting together, hooking up, and then Charmaine finds out that Wesley does not know how to have sex, and it's absolutely hilarious because Wesley has never had a woman tell him, like, you don't know how to have sex, except it's said in definitely more explicit terms. And Charmaine put him in check, and then she teaches him how to have sex, and it was good. I actually enjoyed it, and I ended up giving that one 4 stars. And the last one is Love Under Quarantine, which is actually the reason why I decided to read this series in the first place, because this one is written by Nicole Falls, and I was looking for more Nicole Falls books to read, and this one popped up, and I figured out that it was the 8th book in the series, so I decided to go back and read the rest of them. And I really enjoyed the fact that she closed it out, and this was actually about 2 people who worked on the ship, and they had already had a romance going on, but not really. They were kind of just hooking up with each other, but you could tell that each party had feelings for each other, and that was Juliet and Jenks, and they really had feelings for each other, but neither party wanted to say that they had feelings for each other, so we kind of go through their emotions. It was great. I mean, it's Nicole Falls. I wanted to give it 5 stars, but I couldn't because there were some grammatical errors in there that were kind of glaring. So I only ended up giving it 4 to 5, but I absolutely love Nicole Falls' work. So I would recommend checking out the series. So you don't have to read these books in order. I think that they can be read as standalones. However, I think you'll get more enjoyment reading all of them in order, because what you'll see is that characters will pop up in subsequent books that you've seen before. There's one character who is in every single novella, and it's funny watching the main characters of those novellas react to him, and everybody kind of has similar reactions, but it's funny seeing him pop up over and over again. So I think that if you read it in order, you'll get better context of who he is as a character, but if you read them out of order, I don't think you will. But it's always good just to see kind of those Easter eggs in books like that, but it's up to you however you want to read them, but my recommendation is to read them in order. The next book that I read is Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Power, and I actually have a video coming out of this one tomorrow, so I don't want to say too much about it except the fact that this is about a girl named Margot who is living in this apartment with her mom, and Margot feels like she doesn't know anything about her family. It's this abusive, emotionally abusive relationship and slightly mentally abusive relationship that goes on between her mom and herself, and she wants to know more about her family, and her mom won't tell her anything about her family. So she decides to figure things out, and she goes to her mom's hometown, and she learns stuff about her family when she meets her grandmother. And let me tell you, this book is not what you think it is. That's all I'm going to say. I really don't even want to say anything about this book. Not even because I have a video of it coming out tomorrow, but because of the fact that I literally don't want to tell you anything about this book. Not even really my thoughts, because you'll see in that video my thoughts are pretty much are, what the hell did I just read? It was good. It was really, really good. And this is not a genre that I cling to. I don't even want to tell you what the genre is, because it's a spoiler. So I don't cling to this, but it was just interesting. Just know that I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. You'll see a little bit more of my thoughts tomorrow. It's completely non-spoiler, but definitely check that video out. And the last thing that I ended up reading this month was Fantastic Four issue number 10, written by Stan Lee. So I am back on reading my single issues of the Marvel series that I'm interested in, and right now I am going back to Spider-Man 1963. But yeah, so I'm reading Fantastic Four from the very beginning, starting in 1962. Now I'm in the 1963 run, and I think we just finished the major arc. This is where Doctor Doom comes back after, I believe, in like issue 7 or 8, somewhere around there. Dr. Doom gets blasted off into space, and we think, of course, that it's the end of it, but he comes back and he uses Reed as a way to get to the Fantastic Four to defeat them. I love Dr. Doom as a villain. I think he's a badass villain. If he ever got a true opportunity, he would destroy the Fantastic Four. I'm convinced, because he's just that good of a villain, and he plays a lot on their arrogance, and I like that. I really enjoy that about him as a villain, that they sometimes can come off as like knowing it all, and just because I'm a superhero, because I've been here and I've done this, that means that I know exactly what's going on at all times. And Dr. Doom completely takes that arrogance and flips it on its head and uses it against them. And it was no different in this. I think that we start to see some dynamics change in terms of respect between The Thing and read. And The Thing has a lot of anger, and that's because he's the one character out of the Fantastic Four that has physically, like, visibly changed into a completely different creature, and he harnesses a lot of that anger internally, and it comes off as the lack of respect for other characters in the Fantastic Four, and that dynamic changes a lot. That respect level changes a lot. So that was an interesting thing to see. But I'm gonna switch back over to reading a little bit of Spider-Man. I think I'm also up to read the original issue of when Iron Man is first introduced, so I'm excited. We're gonna see how that's gonna go. But other than that, I ended up giving that one 4 stars. I cannot wait. I think I'm going to have to do a separate wrap up for my comics and manga this month, because I'm flying through some comics and manga, and I really do feel like maybe I need to do a separate wrap up for that. Y'all let me know in the comments below if and I think I just said let me know in the comments below. Let me know in the comments below that if that is something you would want to see if I read enough. If it's not enough, I won't do it. But if I read like enough single issues and I read enough just volumes and stuff, let me know if you want to see that separately, or should I just keep it all together. Just let me know. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button. If you're looking for ways to support my channel, the links will be down in the description box, as well as all of my links to my social media. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Let me know in the comments below, what was your favorite book of August? What was your least favorite book? Tell me what you read. Tell me how much you read. I just really enjoy seeing y'all's wrap-ups and what you're reading during the month and all that jazz. All right, y'all, I'll be back with another video soon. Bye.